Adding and subtracting fractions is something that lots of students struggle with. However, it is an easy concept when we understand the rules we need to follow. There are 3 rules we must always remember when working with fractions. To add and subtract fractions, we must firstly have a common denominator. And remember, this means the number on the bottom of our fractions. So, we must make sure that the number on the bottom of our fractions contains the same value before we try to add them. Secondly, we only ever add or subtract the numerators of our fractions. And remember that the numerator is the number on the top. So once our denominators are the same, we don't touch them. And we'll see why this is when we look at the examples on the next screen. And lastly, always remember to simplify your fractions completely. Bring each fraction back to its smallest equivalent value. Let's look at some examples to see why these 3 rules are so important. Look at example A. We know that we're adding 2 halves together. If we're adding 2 halves of something, let's take a pie for instance. We split it in half. There's my 2 halves. We know that if I add this half here to this half here, it's going to give me back the whole pie. So we know the answer we're supposed to get to. A half added to another half is going to give us 1 whole. Let's now look at how to add these fractions using our 3 rules. Step 1 said make sure your denominators are the same. Let's look at our denominators. They're both 2, so yes, they are the same. Since we don't add the denominators, their value doesn't change, and so this means my answer must have a denominator of 2 as well. So I'm going to write it down. Now move to step 2, which was add the numerators only. So, adding the tops of my fractions, 1 plus 1 gives me 2. And so far my answer is 2 over 2. Remember, don't touch those denominators. Step 3 said simplify my answer fully. We know that 2 over 2 means 2 divided by 2. 2 divided by 2 gives me an answer of 1, or 1 whole, which is what we were expecting to get. And so by following our 3 steps, we obtain the correct answer. Let's now apply this to the remaining questions in our example set. Looking at question B, we now have a quarter plus another quarter. So we're expecting to get back a half as our answer. If we follow those rules, the first thing I need to do is check that my denominators are the same. They're both 4. Remember, my denominator doesn't change. All I do is write it down as a part of my answer. Step 2 says add the tops. 1 plus 1 gives me 2. And step 3 says simplify it fully. 2 quarters, both of those numbers halve evenly. A half of 2 is 1 and a half of 4 is 2, which gives me back the answer I was looking for of a half. Again, for question C, first step, check that your denominators are the same, and if they are, write them down. Then, this time we're subtracting, so take away the tops. 3 minus 1 gives me 2, and again, simplify your answer. Both numbers halve, so do it. And we get back a half of as our answer. Looking at what we started with, if we had 3 quarters of something and we took a quarter away, it means that all we should be left with is a half, which was my answer. So can you now see why we don't add together our denominators? If I had have done it in the first example, adding the tops together gives me 2. If I add the bottoms together, it gives me 4, which is not what our answer is. We can see that gives us back a half. We're not expecting a half. We should have gotten back 1 whole. What is the denominator actually telling us? That's a question I'm going to leave for you to answer for the next lesson.